14 years before the Titanic sank, a writer described a gigantic ocean liner that struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic. The creepy part? The similarities are seriously hard to ignore. The book was called Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan, written by Morgan Robertson and published in 1898. And yes, this story existed before the Titanic was even a name. Think about that for a second. In 1898, nobody was posting Titanic theories online. There wasn't even Wi-Fi to blame. Robertson was simply writing fiction about the future of ocean travel. Robertson wasn't some mysterious fortune teller hiding in a basement. He was a writer with experience and knowledge of ships, and that background makes this story even more interesting. His fictional ship was called the Titan. It was enormous, luxurious, and considered practically unsinkable. Sound familiar? That's where things start getting weird. The Titan and the Titanic even had remarkably similar names. But a similar name alone proves absolutely nothing. Plenty of ships have dramatic names. Apparently, totally normal boat wasn't fashionable. Then comes the really strange part. Robertson's fictional Titan traveled through the North Atlantic, just like the Titanic would 14 years later. Both were massive luxury liners. Both operated on the North Atlantic. Both encountered an iceberg. And both had far fewer lifeboat spaces than the number of people aboard. In Robertson's story, the ship collides with an iceberg. In real life, the Titanic famously struck one on April 14, 1912. Suddenly, this old novel looked a lot less like ordinary fiction. When the Titanic disaster happened, newspapers around the world exploded with coverage. And sitting in literary history was a book that had described a surprisingly similar disaster years earlier. Now the timeline gets dramatic. 1898, Robertson publishes his story. Then 1912 arrives, and the Titanic sinks. That's a 14-year gap between fiction and reality. The similarities are striking, but there's an important warning. The Titan wasn't an exact blueprint for the Titanic. Some details matched, while others were completely different. So what are we looking at here? Was Robertson somehow predicting the future? Or did he understand the dangers of the technology of his own time better than we realize? That question is exactly why this story survived. The more you compare the two ships, the more interesting it becomes. But the answer isn't as supernatural as the internet sometimes makes it sound. Because to understand why Robertson came so close, we have to turn the page and look at the world he actually lived in. And that makes the story even more fascinating. Robertson's Titan was a fictional creation, but its world was based on real maritime technology. He understood ships, engines, and the growing obsession with building vessels bigger and faster. And the North Atlantic wasn't some peaceful swimming pool. It was a difficult route, with harsh weather, heavy traffic, and the very real danger of ice. Icebergs were already a known hazard before the Titanic. So imagining a giant ship encountering one wasn't exactly predicting tomorrow's lottery numbers. Then came the real Titanic, one of the largest passenger ships ever built at the time. It became a symbol of modern engineering, luxury, and confidence. And now the comparison becomes almost uncomfortable. Fictional Titan, enormous ship, North Atlantic, iceberg, lifeboat shortage. Historical Titanic, enormous ship, North Atlantic, iceberg, lifeboat shortage. After the Titanic sank, Robertson's old stories suddenly looked extraordinary. People naturally began looking backward and asking, how on earth did he get so much right? But remember the dates. Robertson wrote Futility in 1898. The Titanic disaster happened in 1912. That 14-year difference is what gives the story its legendary reputation. But here's the catch. Robertson wasn't predicting something impossible. Huge ships were already becoming a major trend, and maritime accidents were real concerns. The ingredients for his story already existed. That he lived during an era obsessed with technological progress. Bigger ships meant more passengers, more prestige, and more confidence. And confidence can be a dangerous passenger. That's why the similarities matter. But so do the differences. The internet often highlights the matches and quietly throws the mismatches into the ocean. The fictional Titan and historical Titanic weren't identical. Their specifications, circumstances, and many details differed. So calling Robertson a literal prophet goes further than the evidence allows. There's also something called hindsight. Once we know the Titanic sank, earlier stories that resemble the disaster suddenly look incredibly prophetic. Our brains are very good at spotting patterns after the fact. The real timeline is simple. Robertson writes fiction in 1898. Ocean technology continues advancing. Titanic sinks in 1912. And afterward, his story gains an astonishing new meaning. Was it a prediction? Probably not in the supernatural sense. But was it an eerie coincidence built from a surprisingly accurate understanding of technology and risk? Absolutely. That's what makes it worth remembering. Point 1 book came 14 years before the Titanic and somehow came remarkably close to describing its fate. Coincidence, insight, or something stranger? Tell me your theory in the comments, and subscribe for more unbelievable stories hiding in history.